I want to start off this morning by just thanking everyone who played a part in Rise. Rise is one of our social justice programs here at the venues that works to help establish financial self-sustainability for people. And whether it was volunteering or participating or helping with meals, the whole variety of different things, it's a really important component of what we do. And as a side note, our first class with Rise is going to be graduating this Tuesday night at 6 o'clock here at the venues. If you are interested in helping to celebrate that with them, I know that they would love to see you. If you'll just let Josh know as you leave, that way we'll make sure that there's plenty of food, but we just want to make sure that we have all needs accommodated for as well. And so I just want to say one more time, thank you everyone who participated in Rise over the last 17 weeks. Let's give them one more hand. A couple of weeks ago, I had a friend of mine from Washington, D.C. post this story from NPR. The headline is, "Goodbye Church, Hello Wellness Industrial Complex." And the big idea of the article is that for a lot of people, they have become hurt or frustrated with like the institutionalized church or religion, and they have turned to the gym as kind of their alternative. And some of this is like really spiritual stuff, like yoga or Pilates, something that's a little bit more spiritually coded as far as fitness. And some of it is just like the religious aspect of going every day or every week to the same gym and seeing the same people and doing it religiously, right? And I'll be honest, I get this, right? When I go to the gym, there are people that I am super vulnerable with, right? It's the people I see 3 or 4 times a week at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they see me in my absolute like zombie state as I just kind of like stumble into the gym. They see me in my like sweatiest, nastiest, stinkiest, like I almost want to just cuss at everything space. And they literally like bear my burden, right? Like if I'm sitting there on the bench and I can't quite finish one more rep, Shane like grabs it and like literally bears my burden. And I think that that is why this whole process has happened. But this article did note one thing that I thought was an interesting comparison. Rena Raphael, who authored the book called The Gospel of Wellness, Gyms, Gurus, Goop, and the False Promise of Self-Care, which is an incredible title of a book, by the way, she wrote this: "Wellness acts like a deconstructed religion. It's like a regulated framework instructing us of how to live our lives. But there are some drawbacks to a bit of these. They don't teach as much about responsibility or community outreach or taking care of each other." And then this last line I thought was so good. She said, "We ride our Pelotons, and then we wonder why America is so lonely." You know, my guess is that most of us get this, right? When the former Surgeon General of the United States says that America is facing a loneliness epidemic, I think there's definitely a space where we start to see this, that there is a need for self-care. And please take care of yourself. Do things like during Mental Health Month, it's a great time to go see a professional counselor, not a pastor, by the way. Go see a therapist and talk to them, develop mental health habits, go to a gym, eat well, do those kinds of things. And we also understand that if our entire world is only wrapped up in the distance between our eyes and the end of our nose, that it can feel very, I don't know, empty, lonely, wondering if there's something more. And while there has been a lot on the news about this lately, it is not a new phenomenon. In fact, almost every ancient wisdom tradition says something about that. In fact, for example, in the Quran it notes, "Know that this worldly life is no more than play, amusement, luxury, mutual boasting, and competition in wealth and children. The life of this world is no more than the delusion of enjoyment." In the Hebrew scripture, what Christians would often call the Old Testament, they write this: that as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was also meaningless, like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anywhere. And then in the Taoist tradition, I love this. This is such a great sentence. It says, work is done and then forgotten. And I wonder how many times we feel that way, right? Like we are literally on the hamster wheel or the treadmill of life, it feels like. And we feel like we do it and we do it and we do it, and then it just feels like there's nothing there. So how do we balance that? How do we find this space between knowing what we need to do to protect ourselves and to care for ourselves while still at the same time leaving some kind of a lasting impact? Today, we're going to be wrapping up our series that we've been talking about for the last several weeks called Choosing Where We Mess Up. And I want to take about 20 minutes this morning and just talk about one of the last ways that many times we need to find this balance where we try to figure out ahead of time where we're going to err. And it feels sort of like this balance between chasing the wind to make ourselves better and simultaneously recognizing the reality that we need to do things beyond just taking care of ourselves. You see, here at the venues, the way that we try to do this is through the value of social justice. And when we talk about social justice here at the venues, we're not just talking about something that we do. Social justice is really fundamentally who we are as the venues. It's the idea that the part of our heartbeat is just partnering with other people and organizations to make the 417 a better place to live, to look for the flourishing in life of other people. And I know most of us would sit here and think, yeah, for sure, that's what I want to do. But we also know that there tends to be this odd balancing act between the two. And it kind of plays out like this, right? Like on one side, there is this idea of not helping at all. And I think most of us are pretty good at saying, we know that we need to help people, but that's kind of the one side of the balance. And then on the other side, there's this notion of exhausting all of our resources without examination. So we can't do it over the long haul. And while those are two of the options, I'm not sure those are the only two options. And so what I would like to propose to you today is that there's actually a third way, this way of social justice. And as a big way to frame this today, the main thought, the thing I want you to leave today with is this thought, that to make the biggest impact when we practice love, we can choose social justice instead of either not helping or depleting all resources, okay? We're going to walk through this and unpack it, but this is the big idea, that to make the biggest impact when we practice love, we can choose social justice instead of either not helping at all or depleting all resources. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through this by looking at a story that many of us might know. In fact, if you grew up going to Sunday school around here, you might even know this story. You might even know a song. And because I promised I would never sing on stage again after the last time I taught, I'm not going to sing it, but you are, right? It's a song that many of us know. It's about a character by the name of Zacchaeus. Does anybody know the first little bit of the song? Zacchaeus was a little man was he, right? And he climbed up in a, right, yeah. So many of us maybe have heard this story, and if you haven't, that's perfectly okay because it's probably not accurate. And sorry to burst your bubble on that. You see, I'm not sure that it was accurate, and I'm not even sure that it was even the main point of the story, although it does make a cute song. It's a story that we find in the Christian New Testament. It's in the book of Luke, which if you had a physical Bible and you were flipping, it'd be the third book in the New Testament, the stories of Jesus' life, Matthew, Mark, and then Luke. And it's basically where people wrote down about the life and the teachings of Jesus. And so this shows up in Luke chapter 19. I'm going to start reading in verse 1, and it says this, that Jesus entered Jericho, which was kind of a stronghold of Jewish life. There were temples there and such, and made his way through the town. And there was a man there named Zacchaeus, and he was the chief tax collector in the region, which basically meant that he was employed by the Roman government to go door to door and collect taxes and then skim some money off the top, and that's how he got paid. And he'd become very rich. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd, so he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. And one thing that's important to note when we read these types of stories is that the Bible wasn't written to us. It wasn't written in English. In fact, the New Testament was mostly written in Greek. And so when you read it in English, which is great because most of us aren't Greek scholars, it helps to understand that what was written was actually probably someone's interpretation of actually what had been written down. And in this story, I think it might actually be helpful to know that because it might completely change the way that we see it. You see, like in verse 3, it said he tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. But this verse actually doesn't say the phrase over the crowd at all. That language isn't in the text. And where it said he was too short, it actually describes Zacchaeus this way. It says that he was halika mikros. And that's important because the word halika comes from the Greek root word helios, which is where we get our words like heliocentric, like the earth revolves around the sun. Like it comes from the word sun. And micros, meaning small, it's where we get our word like microdons, like having small teeth. It's a word that every other time these two words are used together, it doesn't mean he was short, it means he was young. And that is going to be super, super important as we get down. Now, understand, we may be completely wrong with the way that we interpret this because, like I said, it's an interpretation of the text. And this is probably going to burst a Sunday school song. But it seems like maybe what Luke was saying is not that Zacchaeus was a wee little man, but rather that he was a very young man, and a young man who couldn't get to see Jesus because the crowd was large. But he was also a young man who, as the chief tax collector, was very wealthy, and probably not because he had earned it, but because he had inherited it, because he'd been given a certain amount of privilege. And that's actually the first part that I want to start off talking about today, and that's this, that sometimes the first step towards social justice is calling out inequity because it prevents not helping at all. I want you to just play with me here for a second and realize I could be completely wrong about this. But could it be that the reason that Zacchaeus couldn't see Jesus wasn't because he was short, but rather was because he was late? That there was this large crowd that had gathered around Jesus, and he was used to always having the best view of everything because he was wealthy. And so when there's this large crowd that showed up, he started climbing into a sycamore tree. You see, he had grown up with a silver spoon in his mouth, and now as the chief tax collector, which, by the way, interestingly enough, the phrase chief tax collector not only doesn't show up elsewhere in the Bible, it doesn't show up elsewhere in any writing. We don't even know what this phrase means except to think that it probably just means that he had a lot of power that had been given to him by the Roman government. Ched Myers, who has been a professor at numerous seminaries, said it this way, that Zacchaeus had probably inherited his position at the top of the hierarchy as a result of family patronage, likely to the royal house. Indeed, Herod the Great had kept his winter palace in Jericho. So why did he climb up in a tree? Well, some people think that it might have because he was trying to make sure that he could see Jesus and be seen by Jesus. And others suggest that he might have thought that he couldn't defile himself by hanging out with all of the commoners, which might have also been the reason that they were grumbling, because here was this man who had been cheating them out of money, and he just didn't want to put himself in that space. If we can see the scene today, I think we can all think of times where special people were given special privileges, right? Like the people who get the really fancy boxes at the Super Bowl because they've been given it and they are there just to be seen. Or their car gets parked in the special spot at the office. And while there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that, we do feel like there's something probably wrong if they get it not because they've earned it, but because they were given it. In other words, through no fault or achievement of Zacchaeus' own, he'd been given a lot of privilege. And I want to take just a second and drill down on what we mean here at the venues when we talk about privilege. Privilege is not saying that your life is not hard. It probably is. Instead, it's saying that often the reason that someone else's life is hard is something you've never had to think about. That's a lot to unpack. So I'm going to say it again. I want us to think about this. That privilege is not saying that your life is not hard. It likely is. Instead, it's saying that often the reason that someone else's life is hard is something you've never had to think about. There are a lot of privileges that it's possible that Zacchaeus had. He was male in an incredibly patriarchal society. He was associated with the Roman government, which meant he had political power. He was a tax collector, which meant he had financial wherewithal. And he was of Jewish descent, so he probably passed Jewish in a very Jewish culture. I'm confident that we could draw parallels to ourselves about how those privileges played out. But I want you to see what Jesus does when he sees this. In verse 5, it says that when Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus, and called him by name. "Zacchaeus," he said, "quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today." And at first glance, this seems like a weird thing for Jesus to say. It says, "I'm going to come over to your house." It kind of be like right after the teaching this morning, if I came up to someone and I was like, "You're having me over for lunch today, right?" I mean, it feels weird, right? And at first I thought, maybe it's like a syntax thing. Like when Morgan and I used to live in Morocco, one of the differences between Arabic and English is the way that you put the parts of the sentence together. And so a lot of kids, when they'd be learning English, they'd come up and be like, Mister, I want to give you a candy bar." And by that, what they really meant is, "I want you to give me a candy bar." And so at first when I read this, I thought, well, maybe Jesus just misspoke. I don't think so. I'm not sure what Jesus was doing here, whether he was just like playing with words, but I think it's possible that when Jesus called Zacchaeus down from the tree, what he was doing is saying that the system where you think you are better off than everyone else needs to be flipped. That he was changing the positions, that he engaged in some kind of subversive interaction with Zacchaeus. Dr. Diana Butler Bass, who got her PhD from Duke and now speaks on a variety of issues, said this about Zacchaeus. She said, "Jesus was a lower status person and a good Jew. Lower status people never invited their superiors to a meal. In normal circumstances, Zacchaeus should have invited Jesus to his home. But Jesus undermined this whole gratitude business by inviting himself to Zacchaeus' house. This made Zacchaeus not a benefactor, but a beneficiary to the gift. In a moment, Jesus turned his world upside down. Who was the guest and who was the host? Jesus imagined a place where the oppressed and the oppressor leave their stations and meet as friends." By the way, what a beautiful world to imagine, right? A world where the oppressed and the oppressors leave those positions and meet as friends. Is it possible that what Jesus was doing here was engaging in a performative, subversive nature to show everyone around that the path of following Jesus looks like flipping over the tables that have been built to divide us, because oftentimes we use tables as walls? If that's what Jesus is doing here, is setting the stage, then I can't imagine a world where we say, "Yeah, we just don't want to help other people." I can't imagine a world where you read the Bible and say like, "Oh, those others don't deserve to be loved on. That those others don't deserve my attention or my affection or my love." I am so thankful for here at the Venues that part of the starting process of social justice is just calling attention to these things. Last year during Pride, I had a friend who has a trans son who told me that when they saw our group holding this sign, that they cried. Because for the first time in their life, a church saw them. The sign, for those of you that can't read it, says, "As Christians, we are sorry for the ways that we have used God to hurt you." You see, at the end of the day, people can disagree about theology all they want, but when you do these things, what it does is it sets a table to show what's really important. Like I said, I don't think there's a way to read the story of Jesus and determine that the end result is not that we should help others. But does that mean that we just have to give everything away and leave nothing to help the next person who comes along? Maybe it's more nuanced than that. And that's the second thing I want to share today is this, that social justice requires us to do what we can with what we have where we are. Social justice requires us to do what we can with what we have where we are. After Jesus called Zacchaeus down from the tree, I want you to see his response. He says this, "Zacchaeus quickly climbed down the tree and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. But the people," remember the crowd who he'd been cheating, "were displeased. 'He's gone to be the guest of this notorious sinner,' they grumbled. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, 'I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I've cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much.'" A lot of scholars find it interesting, by the way, that this story is shortly after the story of Jesus and the rich young ruler, where Jesus said, "Go give all of your possessions to the poor," and the rich young ruler walked away sad. And in this story, he says, "I'll give half of my wealth away," and it doesn't say that Jesus was sad about that at all. In this story, where Jesus ultimately ends up happy with Zacchaeus' action, he doesn't give away everything. Instead, he makes right the wrongs that he benefited from. It's kind of like the quote from Ijoma Oluo, who in her book, So You Want to Talk About Race, says this. And by the way, if you take a picture of anything, take a picture of this quote. It's fire. It says this: when we identify where our privilege intersects with somebody else's oppression, we'll find our opportunities to make real change. That's an incredible quote. I'm going to read it again because it's so good. When we identify where our privilege intersects with somebody else's oppression, we'll find our opportunities to make real change. Just like Zacchaeus, we can choose to either live with the privilege that we've been given, or we can choose to use that privilege to help those around us. Aluo also talks about how privilege is relative, right? She says, look, like, if a 48-year-old coal miner from West Virginia is standing on a stage next to Oprah Winfrey, they have different privileges. For example, the coal miner's probably never gonna send his best friend to space for 10 minutes as an empowerment of all womankind. Anyway, and for a lot of us, we sit here and we think, like, Chris, that's cool, right? Like, if I was a billionaire, I could give 50% away and that'd be dynamite. Yeah, that'd be cool. Woo. But I'm struggling just to put food on my table for my family, so what do I do? If you're in a spot where you've been privileged financially, maybe justice is you helping cover the cost of some of the things that we've been talking about, right? Helping putting in new flooring in kids' venues so that kids who use wheelchairs don't get tripped up on the carpet. That would be awesome. Or helping fund the next session of the RISE program so that people can learn financial self-sufficiency. But there are also creative non-economic ways. As many of you know, this last year, my wife Morgan and I have had the opportunity and the honor to host an exchange student from Poland named Yulia. And she's been an incredible example of this. You see, her unique privilege is that on Sunday morning, when all of us are tired, either from the week before or looking forward to the week ahead, she is a bundle of energy. And so she uses that every week to volunteer down in kids' venue to chase around the little ones next to our staff. She uses her privilege in unique and creative non-economic ways. One of the other ways that she really opened my eyes this year has been for her passion for women's basketball. And this year, without a doubt, the top women's basketball player in college was Paige Beckers. Not only did she lead her team, the UConn Huskies, to absolutely dominate the tournament, but she was also the top pick in the WNBA draft. And as impressive as her basketball skills are, it's actually her life that is much more impressive to me. You see, Paige is a very outspoken Christian, and a lot of pastors would be like, yay, after every game she gives glory to God. That is not what's impressive to me about her. What's impressive to me is that during Ramadan, while one of her friends, who is Muslim, was having to fast, she took unique action using her privilege to make sure that her teammate got to eat. I want you to take a quick view at this video.
Paige Beckers has been making breakfast at 5 a.m. for her teammate every morning for the last month. That's because her teammate, Jana El Alfi, is fasting for Ramadan. So Paige, being the great teammate she is, decided she'd support her by cooking breakfast before the crack of dawn every morning. And thank goodness Paige is, because Jana doesn't exactly love waking up early. Paige told a story about how Jana slept through her 5 a.m. alarm, and she had to go to her room and yell, "Jana, wake up. I didn't make these scrambled eggs for nothing." It's honestly one of the kindest things I've ever heard a teammate do. So shout out Paige. That's true leadership.
Yeah. That's using your privilege, right? Her religious privilege, where the system is built around her religion, says that you can eat whenever you want. Her teammates' lack of privilege, because the United States is not a Muslim-dominant country, doesn't have those kind of privileges. And so she used her privilege where she was to make a difference for those around her. I wonder what it would look like if we all did the same thing, right? And I'm so thankful for so many of us here at the venues who do that by feeding our unsheltered friends every single Thursday night and Friday morning. Sometimes it's things like volunteering in kids' venue, making a meal for someone, using our natural disposition or economic privilege to help other less privileged groups. But I also wonder if, just like Ulo says, that sometimes we have to use those places where we have privilege to find opportunities to make change. And if you look at the response of Jesus to all this, you can see that change. Why we still have work to do. Here's what it says. At the end of the story, it says, Jesus responded, "Salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be the true son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost." And by the way, that's where the story normally stops in most Sunday schools. But this next sentence rocked my world when I read it. It says, the crowd was listening to everything Jesus said, and because he was nearing Jerusalem, he told them a story to correct the impression that the kingdom of God would begin right away. You see, Jesus understood that people would look at this story of Zacchaeus and be like, okay, well, it's done. We fed some people once, or we gave away some money once. But Jesus instead says that the impression that you should get here is that it's not a one-time action, but it's an ongoing action. And that's the last thing I want to share today, and that's this. Social justice is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing embodiment of who we are supposed to be. Social justice is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing embodiment of who we are supposed to be. A couple of weeks ago, when the tornado struck in this area, it blew our back gate open. And my favorite dog of all time got out. She's a 15-and-a-half-year-old dog named Sandra, and she has like almost 3 good legs. And she escaped. We don't know how she did it. We spent 6 hours looking all over the neighborhood to try to find her, talked to all the neighbors. We posted it on social media, and several of you all helped share that. And some even went around and drove around with us looking to see if we could find her, and we couldn't find her. The next morning, Morgan got a call that someone a few streets over had found her. So we went and picked her up. The person had seen the Facebook message that someone else had posted. So we went and found her, by the way, which is awesome. Thank you, by the way, for your help on that. But you know what would have been absurd for us to have said? It would have been absurd for us to have said, well, now that you're fine, it's all good. We don't have to feed you again. We don't have to make sure your medicine's good. For the next several days, she needed to sleep a little bit extra. She needed some extra food because she'd missed meals. She needed some extra medication because who knows where she was. To make Sandra whole, it took people who could both do the post initially and help us find her, and then take care of her on the long haul. This last week, a lot of the world's attention has been on the election and the positioning of the new Pope, Pope Leo XIV, a man born of incredible privilege here in the United States, who chose to live most of his life with the underprivileged people of Peru. And while there are a lot of questions about what he will do, if he will go too far or not far enough, I do think that there are some early symbols that he understands the necessity to use his privilege. Even choosing his name, Leo, was that step. Nancy Pineda Madrid, who is the president of the Catholic Theological Society of America, notes that the name Leo shows that this will be of importance to him. She says this, Pope Leo XIV's choice of name Leo is telling, signaling social justice. The previous of Catholic social justice. By taking the name Leo, our new Pope locates himself within this tradition. I feel like maybe that is our call today, is to locate ourselves in the position of social justice, to use what we have, where we are, to make a difference. And let me just finish by saying this. I am so thankful for this group of people that I see in front of me who consistently use their privilege to find the places where it intersects with other people's oppression and make a significant and ongoing difference. So thank you, and let's continue this week to locate ourselves every time we find that space. Because I truly think that that's how we get out of the space where the only world we see is between our eyes and the end of our nose. It's more than self-care. It's taking care of everyone around us.